Hey everyone, hope you all are having a decent day, an okay day. I never know how to convey that I hope everybody's doing all right anymore in this day and age. It's like, are you okay this second, this one particular minute? Are you doing all right? Um, so we are moving right along. We are into module 10 this week, and I hope that you all got my email or announcement or however I put it out there. Oh, it's right in the beginning of the module, sorry. So originally on the syllabus and on the schedule, I had you reading chapters 3 and chapter 9. When I got a little bit more into it, I realized that there was a really good amount of information in terms of research and ethics and counseling, and in like the cultural issues focus of research. And I thought, you know what, I want to make sure that I dedicate enough time to both subject areas because they are so incredibly important within research. And so I went ahead and moved your required reading of chapter 9 till the last content module that you'll have goes along better with the chapter in bias, in my opinion. So I think it fits nicer to have the culture, kind of social justice aspects, bias aspects, all lumped together in whatever that last module is. Now I'm drawing a blank on it. So less reading, less textbook reading. Hopefully that's a benefit to you guys. There's still a good amount of reading in this chapter, and within the course itself, I provided some supplemental materials as well that I hope you find useful, and I'll get into that in just a second. Just a couple of general course updates. So this upcoming week, we have the second final research analysis done. So you get to take a little bit of a mental break from your project. If you want, although you can use an article that you might be using for your program evaluation project as your research analysis article. Could be something to do. And you're just going to be focusing on the research analysis. I'm going to be going in, you'll notice that in the discussion board last week, I really didn't get in and comment. I really wanted last week's discussion to be more of a discussion with your peers in terms of looking at those logic models and giving each other some feedback. And I want to provide feedback in a way that will help inform any changes that you make for the draft and for the final document for that logic model, and the summary and the objectives that you're going to be developing. So I didn't want to do that within the discussion board itself. So I'm going to be spending the week getting into those discussions, taking a little bit more time to really look at the logic models that you guys have developed, your objectives, give some targeted feedback on that. I have also put in the assignments area of the course, so on the left-hand side of eCampus in our course, you've got the assignments, so your research analysis Dropbox is there, and I went ahead and put the counseling program evaluation project needs assessment Dropbox within that content area as well. Remember, it is not due this week. You have some time to do that. You can turn it in if you want early. I don't care. That's fine by me. And also with the drafts that you're going to be providing, there's not a grade. There's due dates. I can't deduct points from a 0 grade for turning things in late, so I hope you just get them submitted in a timely fashion. But within the actual assignment, when you open it up, it's going to give you an overview of what kind of this first part is, in addition to an outline for the needs assessment aspect of the project, the whole project. That will not change. That's going to be kind of the first of these two parts of the project that you're going to be required to complete. So that will not change. You can continue to use that as you develop part 2 later on. The rubric that I have in there for the project evaluation is the rubric for the whole thing. So if you are wanting to get a little bit of an idea of what to expect with part 2 of your draft, you can be looking at that rubric. So what I'm looking for in terms of grading is meeting all those points in the rubric, obviously, because that's what I'm going to be using to grade, to evaluate your work, but also doing it in a way that covers all those areas that are outlined in the outline that I provided. So hopefully it makes some sense. If not, as always, ask questions and I will help answer them to the best of my abilities. But I did want to point out before I get into kind of the lecture for the week that is there, and you guys can now have access to that if you wanted to begin actually working and putting together all the information that I hope you've kind of been gathering through discussions and homework assignments and whatnot. I think you'll find through the outline that it, there are all these little key points that you've been working on actually that you're just going to be able to pull right into in a paper format. And it is a paper, so don't like present it to me as an outline. It is a formal APA paper, so be thinking about that as well. Use that APA reference guide, right? All right, so into our actual content for this week. What is more exciting than ethics? Than research, right? Combining them. Let's talk about the two most exciting aspects of counseling, research and ethics. I say that with a lot of sarcasm because I know that a lot of people don't find ethics to be terribly exciting, and a lot of people don't like research or find it to be terribly exciting. I love ethics and I enjoy research. So the combination of both of those things does actually excite me in some kind of odd way. But I really enjoyed how, especially the chapter broke down ethics as it applies to research and counseling into two different topic areas that we have to be cognizant of if we're a researcher in counseling or developing a program to implement for a population of individuals receiving counseling services. So we have to be aware of the ethical principles that inform the actual research process, right? So if we're thinking about going through the steps of a research process, at every single step, we have to make sure that we are developing our research and our programs in an ethical manner. And then on the other side of it are the people, the participants of our research. And so we have to make sure that we are ethically addressing their needs. And so there are a lot of things to take into consideration when we're combining ethics and research, right? So with counseling research and with our codes of ethics, there's of course the ACA Code of Ethics and the CRCC Code of Ethics, the two main codes of ethics that you guys kind of are adhering to within this program, although there are others of course that you might eventually be looking at and guiding that help guide your practice. But within both of those codes of ethics, there's actually specific sections, their own little dedicated sections that talk about research. And so, and even within like counseling and helping relationships, there's notes of what to do if a client is participating in research. But for this week's module, I want you to really dig into the sections that are specific to counseling research within those codes of ethics, because they're very important and they do look a little bit different, right? If you look at kind of the codes of ethics on a larger scale, a good portion of those codes of ethics do apply to those in practice that are working with people and need to know what to do or what not to do in certain situations. But an even bigger part of those codes of ethics are what researchers need to be doing or how they should be proceeding with their research process and disseminating research and all of that, and what to do with participants, and then supervisors and people like me that are teaching you have to abide by that specific set of ethical codes that is included in the larger code that talks about educators and supervisors and the role of educators and supervisors, and again providing ethical practice, doing ethical work. So again, narrow down. I'm not expecting you to read and memorize the entire code of ethics with this module. I want you to look at the specific parts of the codes that relate to research. So in addition to the codes of ethics that you have reading for this week, I did try to kind of separate out, much like the text did, between things that need to be considered from the perspective of developing research, and that's where you are going to be learning about the Belmont Report and institutional review boards and how we, that's going to be the participants, the importance of protecting human subjects, right? That's where we're going to be learning about the Belmont Report and the purpose of IRBs. The other side of it being, what should we be doing when we're developing research in general? And that's some of the just basic notes that I've got for you within this module. So it's really important to remember that when we're going from a research perspective, if we're looking at developing a research study, that we have to be aware of certain ethical issues that could come up during every single stage of the research process. So if you're looking at any kind of research paper, for example, and you're looking at from the very beginning, from the title of that research to the abstract, to the keywords that are being used, and then looking at the introduction and the methodology and the results discussion, limitations, all of that, from start to finish, there are ethical components that we need to take into consideration if we're conducting research. So we have to be very, I say this all the time, we have to be very critical of the work that we're putting out there and the research that we're doing as a whole to make sure that we're not influencing a reader one way or the other, to make sure that we are providing accurate information within our publications or submitting, or the publications we are submitting that will hopefully become publications. We have to make sure that we are really doing thorough literature reviews. And so you'll hear me give you feedback about your literature reviews. Things need to be up to date. They need to be relevant. They need to be from peer-reviewed journals, not just, taking opinions from different sources that are outdated and incorporating them into our research projects as if they were fact. So we have to be aware from the very beginning and the very development of our research ideas, where are we getting those ideas from? What is it grounded in? Is it grounded in an opinion, or what areas do we see bias coming through? And then even as we write research reports, we have to be aware of our language, the language that we're using, to be saying, to not persuade the reader one way or the other that we came into a research project believing fully that we were going to be supporting our hypothesis, right? So we can't. We're not the knowers of all things going into a research project. We have to be able to convey that through our reading as well. When it comes to reporting results and discussing those results, lots of ethics come into play with that aspect of developing a research report and conducting research. The effects of manipulating data, it's not difficult to manipulate data. I don't know of another way to say that. If you're a researcher on a research team, you're a couple people, you're working with numbers. I mean, whenever I submit a paper for publication, that journal is not asking me to submit the entire data set so they can run their own analysis. They are taking what I'm putting down in my results section at face value. And so there is kind of that code of honor that comes into play, that I'm essentially saying I'm abiding by our codes of ethics and reporting to you the actual factual numbers that I got from my research analysis. But hypothetically, could I just make up some numbers and submit them? Well, yeah, sure. And if people are reviewing those papers and it seems legit, then it could very well get out there into the realm of peer review publication to students, to other researchers, to the world, and have very long lasting effects, because we know for many reasons now how misinformation, disinformation can spread quickly and can influence people for a very long amount of time. And so even if a researcher has the best of intentions in doing that, I don't even know what those intentions would be. I think that a lot of times when researchers are putting out information that is not factual, not truthful, there's ego behind that. And I think that there's a lot of pressure that's put on researchers to produce research. And I think that inherent in that pressure from university institutions and other places is that you're going to have people that feel like they need to put manuscripts out, and a number of manuscripts comes above the value of doing so and doing it in an ethically appropriate way. So we know that there can be long-lasting effects from misreporting information, from inflating information, from just outright lying in peer-reviewed publications. So, that aspect of reporting our information becomes very important and really ties directly into our ethical obligations. Even if we're talking about the results, implications and limitations to the research that we've conducted. Red flags do come up if, everything was exactly as the researchers hoped it would be, and there weren't any problems and no limitations could be identified. The text, all the authors in the text, and I've told you, there is no perfect research project. It just does not exist. Perfection is what we, I guess, maybe always strive for, but it's not there. And we have to be okay with that. And so, in reading a research paper, if you're reading that everything was perfect and, all participants that received the intervention showed significant improvements in that area that we thought, and there were no outliers, and, the population, we could generalize this to everybody in the world. This is the magic cure for everything. That's just, that's not doing your readers justice, I think, if you're the researcher, if you're the author of those papers. And it's not really being truthful to the work that was actually done. There's all kinds of other things that come into actually developing research papers that you guys probably don't need to really concern yourself with at this point, unless you're doing some type of publication. But there's all these things that come up, like who's going to be the first author? Why does it matter? And, it does, I guess, but, those things don't necessarily apply to the work you're doing in this class, but I think it is always good to know that there's so much extra stuff that goes into writing a research paper. And there are protections there within our codes of ethics for students, for student researchers, for our peers, and for ourselves if conducting research where, we can take things to ethical boards if somebody steals our work, for example, which happens a lot, oddly, it's still. So plagiarism is a big thing as well, and that's why we use the APA standards, and that's why we evaluate you all on your writing and appropriately citing and quoting when things need to be quoted, putting things in context in the appropriate way. Plagiarism, again, is something that just kind of is persistent, although I think in this day and age it's been easier to track down plagiarism. I've literally taken like sections of papers from students, put them into Google, and geez, I mean, it's just magic that it shows up like direct word for word verbatim sometimes. So it has become easier to catch plagiarism, but I think kind of those intricate little details about plagiarism and research come whenever I could like self-plagiarize technically, right? So I recently, like over the summer, submitted a paper with a team of individuals for publication, and within it I actually cited my dissertation, and so I could have been plagiarizing myself had I not cited myself. And so I had to go back through my published dissertation, make sure that I wasn't using the exact same language, make sure that I was restructuring my own ideas from years ago, and then appropriately citing myself and including myself in references. So those are little unique things that come up with plagiarism, and all of that ties back into our codes of ethics, right? So the other side of all of this, right, is how our participants are treated during the research process and the treatment of human subjects. And this is one of those areas where if you look back far enough in history, you're going to see just abhorrent behavior by researchers, especially towards minorities and oppressed populations, people with disabilities, women, children, and even in more recent years, time periods where our grandparents, potentially ourselves, were even alive before things like the Belmont Report came out, where it was just kind of like the Wild Wild West in terms of research, and people were just doing things without considering the long-term consequences of the human beings that they were experimenting on. So I provided a couple of examples to elaborate on some of the examples in the text, like the Tuskegee experiment. Milgram's study is one of the more famous ones. Little Albert and the bunny is another one. So I provided some examples of those research studies, research experiments where ethics was just kind of blatantly ignored. But then again, there might not have been the full-blown ethical codes that those researchers would have had to abide by in the first place. So now we live in an era where we treat human subjects in a very humane way, where we have to, somebody working in an institution, as a professor, I have to do training on researching human subjects. I have to go through our institutional review board, a WVU, which is pretty robust, considering that we're the highest level research institution that you can be. And so there are lots of different things that I need to do anytime I'm conducting research under my name as a WVU employee to protect the population of individuals that I'm going to be working with. You see even more stringent guidelines for research around human subjects when those subjects are children, when those subjects are individuals with like disabilities, intellectual disabilities, people that may not be able to give their own formal consent. So, you know, it's a matter of really justifying why you have to be studying that particular population rather than studying a group of adults that can give informed consent without any other issue, and then generalizing that to children populations or other populations. So there are these checks and balances, I think, if you will, that have been put into place through IRBs, through the Belmont Report. Belmont Report, I've got some information for you within the content, within the module content as well, was really unique in that the government kind of intervened into science, and they actually agreed on something, which, again, as we are all currently seeing, doesn't typically happen when you're talking about the government and scientists coming to an agreement on something. So the Belmont Report was pretty significant in that, you know, there needed to be some regulation so that people were protected, so participants were protected. Scientists agreed with that, researchers agreed with that, and there we have the Belmont Report, which is pretty concise. I mean, a 10-page report that kind of dictates the things that we need to be considerate of is kind of nice to have rather than like a 50-page legal jargon government document. So things that, you know, we have to be aware of when we're researching human subjects are providing informed consent, allowing participants to opt out. A lot of these things we've talked about, and I've talked about in past lectures. Allowing participants who are not receiving treatment at a later time to receive the treatment if it's proven to be effective. You know, some of it has to do with kind of the more medical research that goes on, but when we're talking about counseling research, you know, that could be that we're, you know, just doing kind of like the general talk therapy with somebody that's not receiving that specific concrete intervention, but later on we're allowing that group, that control group to receive the same intervention that our other group receives. So things like that, making sure that we are looking at potential risks and harm, informing potential participants of those risks and potential for harm that we've identified. If we identify those things, and if we have worked to mitigate risk and harm within our research study and somebody is agreeing to participate, again, we're allowing them to opt out if they want to, then we are meeting that ethical obligation, right? We're giving people that autonomy to participate if they want, but not come back if they choose to do that as well. We are, you know, weighing out pros and cons as we're developing a research idea and how we're going to do and conduct the research. We weigh out the pros and cons of how much information we're going to be informing our participants of, right? Because sometimes we have to withhold some information to see if that intervention was actually effective. We don't want to divulge all of our secrets, right? But, you know, it becomes a balance again of, you know, what risk would we be putting our participants at if we didn't tell them anything versus the benefit or potential for benefit later down the road. So, you know, when you're reading material, I do always like to point out that when we're talking about some of those other research ethics related items like the Belmont Report, they're not talking about the full scope of those ethical principles that we need to adhere by as counselors. So I do like to always point that out to make sure to look at the ethical principles and memorize those essentially for testing purposes later on. But there is a lot of overlap between what those ethical obligations are, those principles that that underlie the research that anybody is doing really, and our codes of ethics and our principles within CRCC and ACA. So I think that's pretty much about covered everything that I needed to cover today, kind of followed that short little PowerPoint that I provided for you. So there, again, there's no discussion around ethics, no discussion board for this week. So if you have any questions, if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to me. And I will just be looking for some feedback on the discussion post from last week about your logic models.